On August 6, 1945, the sun rose twice over Hiroshima. The second sun was man-made, hotter than the surface of the sun itself, vaporizing 80,000 people in seconds. 3 days later, Nagasaki burned. Over 200,000 dead. Japan became the only nation in history struck by atomic bombs, twice. The world thought Japan was finished. Total surrender, cities in ruins. It should have been the end. But it wasn't. Within 30 years, Japan rose to become the world's second-largest economy, with 10% GDP growth for 3 decades. From atomic ashes to bullet trains to global dominance. But this wasn't the first time Japan refused to die. This is a 15,000-year-old civilization that created the world's first pottery, produced samurai who chose death over dishonor, sealed itself off for 250 years, then transformed from feudal society to industrial empire in just 50 years. In this video, we're walking through all 15,000 years. Let's get into it. Long before samurai, before emperors, before Japan even had a name, people lived on these volcanic islands. Around 14,000 BC, hunter-gatherer communities settled across the Japanese archipelago during what historians call the Jomon period. The name comes from the pottery they created, vessels decorated with cord markings pressed into wet clay before firing. And this pottery is significant. Archaeological evidence suggests that Jomon pottery, dating to around 14,500 BC, is among the oldest in the world. These weren't nomadic hunters constantly moving. They were sedentary communities living in pit houses, harvesting chestnuts, acorns, and fish from rivers and coasts, and developing a surprisingly complex culture for a hunter-gatherer society. But the most mysterious artifacts from this period are the dagu. These are small clay figurines, often depicting humanoid figures with exaggerated features, large goggle eyes, elaborate decorations, and strange proportions. Thousands have been found across Japan, yet their purpose remains unclear. Were they religious icons? Fertility symbols? Protection charms? No one knows for certain. Some dagu were deliberately broken after creation, suggesting ritual use. The Jomon people lived this way for over 10,000 years, longer than recorded history itself. They developed sophisticated pottery techniques, built permanent settlements, and created art that still fascinates archaeologists today. But around 300 BC, everything changed when new people arrived from the Asian mainland, bringing with them technologies that would transform Japan forever. Around 300 BC, rice cultivation arrived in Japan from the Korean peninsula. With it came bronze and iron tools, new agricultural techniques, and a wave of migration that would fundamentally alter Japanese society. This marks the beginning of the Yayoi period, named after the district in Tokyo where artifacts from this era were first discovered. The Yayoi people brought wet rice farming, which required irrigation systems, communal labor, and permanent settlements built around paddy fields. This wasn't just a new food source, it was a complete social revolution. Rice cultivation produced surplus food, which meant population growth, social stratification, and the emergence of leadership hierarchies. Bronze and iron metallurgy arrived during this period as well. Bronze was used primarily for ritual objects like bells called dotaku, while iron was forged into weapons and agricultural tools. For the first time, Japan had access to metal weapons, and with them came organized warfare. Archaeological sites from this period show evidence of fortified settlements and segregated grave sites, indicating both tribal conflict and the emergence of social classes. The Yayoi period also marks Japan's first appearance in written history. Chinese records from the Book of Han, published in 111 AD, mention a land called Wa made up of about 100 small kingdoms. Later, the Book of Wei describes a powerful kingdom called Yamatai, ruled by a female monarch named Queen Himiko, around 240 AD. The location of Yamatai remains one of Japan's great archaeological mysteries, but it's clear that by this time, Japan was transitioning from scattered tribes to organized kingdoms. By 250 AD, the Yayoi transformation was complete. Japan had moved from hunter-gatherer communities to agricultural societies with metalworking, warfare, trade networks, and centralized leadership. The stage was set for the rise of Japan's first imperial dynasty. Around 250 AD, powerful clans began constructing massive burial mounds across Japan, marking the beginning of the Kofun period. These keyhole-shaped tombs, some over 480 meters long, required thousands of laborers and years of construction. The largest, the Daisen-ryo Kofun, near Osaka, is believed to be the tomb of Emperor Nintoku and took approximately 15 years to complete. It's one of the largest burial structures ever built, rivaling the pyramids of Egypt in sheer volume. These Kofun weren't just graves, they were statements of power. The clans that built them controlled vast territories, commanded armies of workers, and claimed divine ancestry. The most powerful of these clans was the Yamato, based in the Kainai region of central Japan. The Yamato rulers gradually extended their influence across the islands, not primarily through conquest but through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and the promise of positions within a centralized government. This period also marks the introduction of Buddhism to Japan. In 538 AD, the Korean kingdom of Baekje sent Buddhist texts and images to the Yamato court. Buddhism didn't replace Japan's native Shinto religion. Instead, the two coexisted in what became known as Shinbutsu Shugo, a syncretism that continues today. Buddhism brought with it Chinese writing, Confucian philosophy, and continental governance models that would reshape Japanese political structure. In 607 AD, Prince Shotoku commissioned the construction of Horyuji, a Buddhist temple that still stands today as the world's oldest surviving wooden structure. Shotoku also authored the 17-article Constitution, a Confucian-inspired code emphasizing harmony, respect for authority, and Buddhist values. Japan was no longer a collection of warring clans. It was becoming a unified state with a centralized government, an imperial dynasty, and cultural institutions that would endure for centuries. In 710 AD, Japan's imperial government established a permanent capital at Heijō-kyo, modern Nara, modeled after the Chinese Tang dynasty capital of Chang'an. This marks the beginning of the Nara period and Japan's classical age. For the first time, Japan had a fixed capital, a centralized bureaucracy, and a written legal code, the Taiho Code, that organized the state into provinces and established taxation systems. The Nara period saw the compilation of Japan's first written histories, the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, which chronicled legendary accounts of Japan's origins and claimed the imperial line descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu. These texts established the divine legitimacy of the emperor and created a national mythology that unified the country under a single narrative. But the Nara period was also marked by disaster. Epidemics, famines, and earthquakes struck repeatedly. A smallpox epidemic in 735-737 killed over a quarter of the population. Emperor Shomu, fearing divine wrath, ordered the construction of massive Buddhist temples, including Todai-ji, which housed a giant bronze Buddha statue. Buddhism became deeply intertwined with state power, and Buddhist monasteries grew increasingly influential and wealthy. In 794 AD, the capital moved again, this time to Heian-kyo, modern Kyoto, where it would remain for over 1,000 years. This marks the beginning of the Heian period, often considered the golden age of Japanese culture. Political power gradually shifted from the emperor to the Fujiwara clan, a family of court nobles who controlled the throne through intermarriage and regency. By the 10th century, Fujiwara no Michinaga held such power that he married 4 of his daughters to emperors. The Heian court was obsessed with aesthetic refinement. Poetry contests, elegant clothing, incense blending, and calligraphy were the markers of status. The Japanese developed 2 new writing systems, hiragana and katakana, allowing literature to be written in native Japanese rather than Chinese. This period produced some of Japan's greatest literary works, including The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu, often called the world's first novel, and The Pillow Book by Sei Shonagon, a collection of court observations and poetry. But beneath this cultural flowering, political power was fracturing. The Fujiwara clan's dominance weakened, and regional military clans began consolidating power in the provinces. By the late 1100s, 2 powerful samurai clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, were competing for control of Japan. The classical age was ending, The age of the samurai was about to begin. In 1185, the Minamoto clan, led by Minamoto no Yoritomo, defeated the Taira clan in the Genpei War, ending centuries of court aristocracy dominance. Yoritomo established a military government in Kamakura, far from the imperial capital in Kyoto, and took the title of Shogun, military dictator. Power had officially shifted from emperors to warriors. The Kamakura shogunate ruled Japan for over 140 years, establishing the samurai as the dominant class. Samurai followed Bushido, a strict code emphasizing loyalty, honor, martial skill, and acceptance of death. A samurai who failed his lord or lost in battle was expected to commit seppuku, ritual suicide by disembowelment, to restore honor. This wasn't a metaphor. Samurai carried two swords and would use them on themselves rather than face shame. The Kamakura government faced its greatest test in 1274 and 1281, when Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan launched two massive invasions of Japan. Both times, typhoons destroyed the Mongol fleets, storms the Japanese called kamikaze, or divine wind, believing the gods had protected Japan. The invasions were repelled, but the financial strain weakened the shogunate, and in 1333 it collapsed. The Muromachi period that followed was marked by weaker shoguns and stronger regional warlords called daimyo. By the mid-1400s, central authority had effectively disappeared, and Japan descended into the Sengoku period, the age of warring states. For over 150 years, daimyo fought each other for territory, alliances shifted constantly, and entire regions were devastated by warfare. Then, in 1543, Portuguese traders arrived, bringing firearms to Japan for the first time. Within decades, Japanese swordsmiths were mass-producing muskets, and warfare transformed overnight. The daimyo who mastered gunpowder tactics gained decisive advantages. Three figures emerged to reunify Japan: Oda Nobunaga, who began the process through ruthless military campaigns and innovative use of firearms; Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who continued the unification after Nobunaga's assassination; and finally Tokugawa Ieyasu, who won the decisive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, defeating a coalition of rival daimyo and establishing the Tokugawa shogunate. Japan was unified again, but this time under a military dictatorship that would close Japan off from the world for 250 years. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu was appointed shogun by the emperor, establishing the Tokugawa shogunate with its capital in Edo, modern Tokyo. The Tokugawa implemented a rigid feudal system. Daimyo controlled regional domains, but were required to spend alternate years in Edo, preventing them from building independent power bases. Samurai became a hereditary class with stipends, but no wars to fight. Then Japan made a radical decision. In the 1630s, the Tokugawa shogunate enacted the Sakoku edicts, policies of national isolation. Christianity was banned, and Japanese Christians were persecuted and executed. Japanese citizens were forbidden from leaving the country on penalty of death. Foreign ships were turned away, and trade was restricted to a single Dutch trading post on an artificial island in Nagasaki Harbor. For 250 years, from 1603 to 1853, Japan existed in near total isolation from the rest of the world. No foreign books, no foreign trade, no knowledge of the Industrial Revolution, the American Revolution, or the Napoleonic Wars. Japan sealed itself off, believing isolation would preserve its culture and protect it from European colonization. Yet isolation didn't mean stagnation. The Edo period saw remarkable cultural development. Kabuki theater, haiku poetry, ukiyo-e woodblock prints, and the rise of urban merchant culture all flourished. Edo grew into one of the world's largest cities, with over 1 million residents. Literacy rates were among the highest in the world. Japan was peaceful, stable, and culturally vibrant, but technologically frozen. Then in 1853, everything changed. On July 8, 1853, 4 American warships under Commodore Matthew Perry sailed into Edo Bay. These black ships, powered by steam engines and armed with modern cannons, represented technology Japan had never seen. Perry delivered a letter from President Millard Fillmore demanding that Japan open its ports to American trade. The Tokugawa shogunate was paralyzed. They couldn't defeat Perry's fleet. They couldn't ignore the demand. And they knew what had happened to China during the Opium Wars, forced open, humiliated, and partially colonized by European powers. Perry left, promising to return the following year for Japan's answer. The shogunate consulted daimyo and court nobles, breaking centuries of centralized decision-making. Opinion was divided, but the conclusion was clear: Japan couldn't resist Western military power. When Perry returned in 1854, Japan signed the Convention of Kanagawa, opening 2 ports to American ships. The humiliation shattered the shogunate's authority. For 250 years, the Tokugawa had promised to protect Japan from foreign threats. Now they had been forced to submit without a fight. Anti-shogunate movements gained momentum, rallying around the slogan "Revere the Emperor, expel the barbarians." In 1868, after a brief civil war called the Boshin War, the Tokugawa shogunate fell. Emperor Meiji was restored to political power, and Japan began the most rapid transformation any nation had ever undertaken. The Meiji Restoration wasn't just a change of government, it was a complete reinvention of Japanese society. The new Meiji government had a single goal: modernize Japan quickly enough to avoid colonization by Western powers. In 1871, the feudal domains were abolished and replaced with prefectures under central government control. In 1873, universal military conscription was introduced, ending the samurai's monopoly on warfare. In 1876, samurai were forbidden from wearing swords in public. Their stipends were converted to bonds, and many were left impoverished. The samurai class, which had ruled Japan for 700 years, was abolished in less than a decade. The government sent students abroad to study Western technology, law, and military systems. Railways were built, telegraph lines installed, Western-style schools opened across the country. The Meiji Constitution of 1889 established a parliamentary system modeled after Germany's. Industrialization accelerated rapidly. By 1894, Japan had a modern navy and a conscript army trained in Western tactics. That year, Japan fought China in the First Sino-Japanese War and won decisively, shocking the world. In 1905, Japan defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, becoming the first Asian nation to defeat a European power in modern warfare. By 1912, when Emperor Meiji died, Japan had transformed from a feudal samurai society into an industrialized empire with colonies in Korea and Taiwan. The transformation had taken just 50 years, the same time span between the end of the U.S. Civil War and World War I. Japan had joined the ranks of global powers, but the path it would take next would lead to catastrophe. After Emperor Meiji's death, Japan continued its imperial expansion. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, establishing a puppet state. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China, leading to atrocities including the Nanjing Massacre, where an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese civilians and prisoners of war were killed. Japan's military increasingly controlled the government. Civilian politicians who opposed military expansion were assassinated. By the late 1930s, Japan was a military dictatorship, pursuing an empire across Asia. In 1940, Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, forming the Axis powers. The United States responded with economic sanctions, cutting off Japan's oil supply. Faced with resource shortages, Japan made a fateful decision: attack the United States and seize Southeast Asian oil fields before America could intervene. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, destroying much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The attack was tactically successful but strategically catastrophic. It brought the United States, with its vast industrial capacity, fully into World War II. For the next 4 years, Japan fought a brutal war across the Pacific. Initial victories gave way to devastating defeats. By 1945, Japan's navy was destroyed, its cities were being firebombed, and American forces were closing in on the home islands. Then came August 1945. On August 6, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, The blast killed an estimated 80,000 people instantly, with tens of thousands more dying from radiation and injuries in the following weeks. On August 9th, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, killing approximately 40,000 people immediately. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender in a radio broadcast, the first time most Japanese citizens had ever heard the emperor's voice. Japan, the empire that had conquered half of Asia, was defeated. Over 3 million Japanese had died. Cities lay in ruins. The nation that had risen so quickly had fallen just as fast. Once again, the world thought Japan was finished. Once again, they were wrong. The Allied occupation of Japan, led by General Douglas MacArthur, lasted from 1945 to 1952. A new constitution was enacted in 1947, transforming Japan into a constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy. The emperor remained, but lost all political power. Japan renounced war and committed to pacifism, a clause that remains in Japan's constitution today. Land reforms broke up large estates and distributed land to farmers. Industrial conglomerates called zaibatsu were dissolved. War crime trials were held, though many believed they were incomplete. The occupation was controversial, but it laid the groundwork for Japan's reconstruction. Then came the Korean War in 1950. The United States needed a regional manufacturing base to support the war effort, and Japan, with its skilled workforce and industrial infrastructure, became that base. Orders for steel, vehicles, and equipment poured in. The Japanese economy, which had been devastated just 5 years earlier, began growing rapidly. What followed became known as the Japanese economic miracle. From 1955 to 1973, Japan's real GDP grew at an average annual rate of 9.4%, the fastest sustained economic expansion in modern history. By 1968, Japan had become the world's second-largest economy, surpassing West Germany. How did Japan achieve this? Several factors contributed: a highly educated workforce, government support for key industries, close cooperation between corporations and banks, a culture emphasizing hard work and group loyalty, and access to American technology and markets. By the 1980s, Japan had achieved what seemed impossible just decades earlier. Japanese companies dominated global markets in automobiles, electronics, and consumer goods. Toyota and Honda revolutionized car manufacturing with efficiency and quality that American automakers struggled to match. Sony's Walkman changed how the world listened to music, while Panasonic's electronics filled homes across every continent. Japanese products became synonymous with reliability, innovation, and cutting-edge technology. Japan's economic success went beyond products. By 1987, Japan's per capita income had surpassed that of the United States, a stunning reversal for a nation that had been in ruins 4 decades earlier. Tokyo's real estate became the most expensive in the world. At one point, the land value of Tokyo's Imperial Palace grounds exceeded the entire value of California. Japanese corporations purchased iconic American assets: Rockefeller Center in New York, Columbia Pictures in Hollywood, and prime real estate across major cities. The nation that had been bombed into submission was now buying pieces of the country that had defeated it. Japan had done it again. From atomic devastation to economic superpower in less than 50 years. The pattern of crisis, transformation, and survival had repeated itself once more, but this time the whole world was watching. Yet the economic bubble burst in 1991, leading to what Japan calls its lost decades. Years of stagnation, deflation, and economic struggle. Other Asian economies rose to challenge Japan's dominance. China surpassed Japan to become the world's second-largest economy in 2010. The unstoppable momentum seemed to have finally stopped, but Japan adapted once again. Today, Japan remains the world's third-largest economy, a technological leader, and a cultural superpower with influence far beyond its size. Anime and manga have become global phenomena, shaping entertainment industries worldwide. Video games born in Japan, from Nintendo to PlayStation, dominate the industry. Japanese cuisine, from sushi to ramen, has conquered international palates. The The soft power Japan wields through culture rivals the hard power it once sought through empire. Walk through any Japanese city and you'll see the paradox clearly. Bullet trains slice through the landscape at over 300 kilometers per hour, yet ancient wooden temples stand undisturbed in Kyoto, preserved for over 1,000 years. Robots assist in factories and care for the elderly, yet tea ceremonies are still performed with the same precise rituals practiced for centuries. Neon-lit skyscrapers tower over neighborhoods where traditional festivals continue unchanged. And the imperial dynasty that began in the Kofun period over 1,500 years ago still reigns, making it the oldest continuous monarchy in the world. This is the paradox of Japan, a nation that preserves its past while constantly transforming its future. A civilization built on volcanic islands that have been shaken by earthquakes for 15,000 years, buried by volcanic eruptions, and struck by tsunamis that wipe out entire coastlines, and yet it endures. The pattern holds. Contact brings crisis. Crisis forces transformation. Transformation leads to survival. And survival becomes strength. This has been Japan's story for 15,000 years. When rice farming arrived from Korea, Japan transformed from hunter-gatherers to agricultural kingdoms. When Buddhism came from China, Japan absorbed it without abandoning Shinto. When Portuguese traders brought guns, Japan mastered firearms within decades. When American warships forced the country open, Japan became an industrial power in half a century. When atomic bombs destroyed 2 cities, Japan rebuilt into an economic miracle. Every contact brought disruption, every disruption forced change, and every change made Japan stronger. From Jomon pottery to samurai swords to atomic bombs to bullet trains, from 14,000 BC to today. Japan has faced destruction again and again: earthquakes, tsunamis, civil wars, foreign invasions, isolation, forced opening, imperial collapse, and nuclear annihilation. And every single time, it has risen. Not just survived, thrived. Other civilizations have collapsed under far less pressure. Rome fell, the Mongol Empire fragmented, the Ottoman Empire dissolved. But Japan endures. The same imperial dynasty, the same islands, the same refusal to disappear. This is the story of a civilization that refuses to die.